so I don't have a prepared statement because I just talked for 20 minutes down in the meeting room, so I'm happy to take questions.
The proposed budget has an elimination of 102 full-time positions, I believe. Some of those, I believe, were already vacant. Do you have a breakdown of which ones were vacant and how many are currently filled?
Yeah, so I mean, in a budget where we had to take, millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in cuts, we knew that FTE, reductions were going to be a part of it. We tried to focus on the vacant positions, but that's not always the case. So we're finalizing the numbers based on, my decisions in the budget to really find out which ones are filled and which ones were vacant. We're going to have that information probably by next Tuesday, when we have the general budget overview by our budget director, Christian Elkin. So we should have all of those numbers on Tuesday morning.
For those positions that are currently filled, are those positions that are going to be eliminated before July 1st?
Well, nothing's final yet until the board adopts the budget on June 12th. So depending on the decisions that are made in the next 7 weeks with our entire board, that the number of 102 may shift a bit. And so we won't know that. The county has a long process though. So even back in February, when the departments submitted their recommended budgets, there were identified cuts there, and there has been communications with those potentially impacted employees since then, because we do want to make sure there aren't any surprises, although again, nothing will be truly final until June 12th.
What do you want to tell the people of Portland, especially the people in Multnomah County? What would you want to say to them if they're referring?
Yeah, I firmly believe that even in the toughest of budget years, the services, the program, the work that Multnomah County does is the most important work that is happening for our community. We are there for people sometimes on their worst day. At the same time, we are trying to build a county where everyone has the ability to live, rise, and thrive. And so as I made the decisions about my budget, it was really about focusing on direct services to people, those critical services, the areas, whether it's in the health department or the homeless services department or our human services, where we really engage with people who need our work the most. And so that led my decision. That led my decision in making administrative cuts and trying to focus on programs where we're serving the most vulnerable, marginalized communities, and where we know those programs have the best impacts. I think that but with budget cuts of this size, even with trying to prioritize those things, I know that there are going to be impacts to people. I know there are going to be impacts to services, and it's hard. But what it's important to me is that Multnomah County continue to be a safe, stable place for our community, especially when so much of what's happening at the federal level is in flux, and that is something that they can count on for our county. Christine?
I'm saying cuts to DEI program or staffing. Is it the program or staffing in some of these?
So, in all of the departments I met with, in all of the conversations that I had with my team, in all of the decisions I made, how we are focusing on equity, how are we continuing to invest in our workforce equity strategic plan, in those programs that we know are serving our BIPOC community members. We were really trying to uphold those. The county does that work, and that work is so embedded in so much of the work that we do that anytime there's cuts, there are probably going to be some equity impacts just because of the populations we serve. But what we wanted to do is try to be intentional, and again, for me, it was about funding programs, keeping programs that we knew had impact on, especially for communities like LGBTQIA2S+, homeless services, and day centers, right? That was a big focus for me in looking at our internal employees, the work that we're doing with our workplace equity strategic plan, making sure that we are investing across the county in programs like our equity managers throughout the departments, and continuing that. So that was something that was at the forefront, and I think also just because of the size of the cuts and the expansive work that we do on those issues, there's going to be some impacts, unfortunately.
Can you specify though, is it a program that you're cutting, or is it just staff from a DEI office? Like, what's the?
So all of I think what you're referring to is that there was a vacant position in the Office of Diversity and Equity, and we actually had two of those positions within that. Both of them had been vacant for much of this fiscal year. One of those has been hired, but the other hadn't been hired yet. And after talking with Joy Fowler, it felt like that taking this cut was going to have the least impact on the work because we did have another position that was doing this work at the county as a new position. There was also a proposed cut for an LGBTQIA2S plus member in that office that I did not take that cut, and I made sure to preserve that.
And then with the adult parole and probation program cuts, I mean, it seems like a pretty essential service to be cutting, especially when courts are already so overburdened and you're trying to, strengthen our justice system and give people options. How are you, making up for that?
Yeah, so for me, both community safety, public safety, I know how important that is, and how important the work that Multnomah County does in those areas are. So, for instance, the sheriff's office, I did not require the sheriff to take any reductions when she was proposing her budget, and I didn't take any reductions for the sheriff's office. For our Department of Community Justice, which does our parole and probation, they only were asked to take a 3% cut, and again, they tried to make those cuts based on vacant positions. But what happened at the time, so the department recommended budget comes out in February, my budget comes out today. In between that time, we learned that we lost a contract from Washington County and that's a contract to have their youth go into our youth facility. And so there were additional cuts. There was a program cut that was required because of the ending of that contract that didn't have to do with the reductions that I asked, but is going to have impact on that work. But again, for the parole and probation, that has been an area where there have been staffing challenges for the last few years, just like a lot of public safety. And so there were several vacant positions, and we really tried to focus on those first as we were doing reductions. And again, it was with working together with Denise Pena, the department director, to really make the most strategic cuts where we had to because of some of the changes in the revenue.
It says adult parole and probation, though, not youth. In the cuts.
So if there are the cuts in the adult parole and probation, a lot of those were the vacancies. There are still vacant positions that need to be filled in this next year, and I think that this gives our human resources and the Department of Community Justice's human resources time to start to do the work to recruit people, to fill those positions, to start bringing that back. We had conversations about caseload, we had conversations about the vacancies, and there were some opportunities there to do a little more efficiencies and as they're growing back and trying to fill some of those vacancies that do remain.
So the cuts were just made because it was already vacant?
We tried to focus on those cuts that were vacant. I think there may have been some filled positions, but maybe just a few. We can find out that information for you. It was really on the vacant positions and where they could balance the caseload across the different areas of parole and probation and DCJ to make sure that cuts weren't going to have a very negative impact on the caseload and the workload for people who are doing the supervision.
You talk about prioritizing direct services. How is that judged? Couldn't direct services be different for different residents of Multnomah County? How are those decisions made when prioritizing what you call direct services?
Yeah, I mean, that's so much of the work that we do is direct services. So when I talk about that, I mean, what are those programs, what are those services that we are doing that really is where we're working with the public, we're meeting with the public, and again, really focusing on those folks who most rely on the county services, who maybe are the most marginalized or have the least other options to go to get those services that they're getting, and that's what we focused on. So, as I was looking at, there was a proposed cut for the STI clinic, which is a health clinic that really is the only one in the state that is providing that kind of health treatment to folks. That is a direct service that we are uniquely positioned to do. We actually serve people from outside Multnomah County who needs those services. So for me, that was something that we had to find a way to keep, even though the dollars that we're getting from the state and other revenue sources to support that work has actually diminished over the last several years, I think this was a place where the county needed to step in. I always look at, where the need is geographically, like the needs in East County or in East Portland, because we know that there's a lot more need in there. So looking at some of the services and programs that affect people in those areas.
And with the homeless problem still being what it is, mental health does play a role in that. Talk about the decision to reassign school-based mental health services for a vulnerable population as they're getting ready to enter adulthood.
Yeah, so the school-based mental health program is something that we know is a key, and in several places in my budget, I wanted to make sure that we were supporting youth, we were supporting children, we were supporting families in this work. So looking at the improvements and changes to the Sun school system, looking at the work that we're doing across the board in schools, right? That was a part of the whole calculus. For the school-based mental health services, those are really critical, and we know, again, for many families, this is the way that they can get connected to services that are much harder to access. So it was my intention that we keep the case management part of that work, and that we really use this next year to discover the ways that we can increase the revenue that comes in through those services while keeping the folks in school and keeping those services available to as many children as possible. But to your point about, focusing on homelessness, we know, homelessness is a crisis in our community. There are far too many people who are sleeping unsheltered on our streets, who are struggling or at risk of becoming homeless. And so that was why, in looking across the entire budget, I made the decision to move almost $30 million from general fund into our homeless services work to supplant the decrease in supportive housing service measure dollars that we were getting.
And speaking of homeless, we've seen different numbers for the shortfall. Do you know off the top of your head the exact number for that shortfall, or can we get that from someone?
Yeah, we can get that for you. I think that what we're looking at is there was about an over $80 million decrease in the Homeless Services Department budget from the SHS dollars from the previous year to this year. So the Homeless Services Department's budget is that much smaller. Some of that is because of the decrease in the SHS revenue, right? We were able to, I was, in talking with the department and working with the leadership there, we were able to use some of our reserves and contingencies to help fill some of that gap. So that was like originally a $104 million gap from the work that we're doing today to the work that we would want to be doing, next year's. So we filled that with some reserves and contingencies. Again, I moved a lot of our general fund dollars into the Homeless Services Department to backfill some of those SHS. There is still a gap, though, that we have, and that we're in conversations about how do we prioritize our needs, both shared needs between the county and the city of Portland, to really advocate for that. But for me, the important thing was that in my budget, we're funding the continuum that we've built over the last 3 years, even if we are not able to go as far this year as originally planned, but really making sure that prevention, emergency shelter, the dollars that are needed to take somebody who might be living in a shelter into housing, and going and helping people get and stay permanently housed, that we have that support for the continuum there.
What would you say to people as the shortfall? Why is it so short? Like, what's going on? Since taxes are never higher, why is it so short?
Yeah, so the years, looking at the supportive housing service measure dollars, right? Those are funded in two ways, right? Those are funded by a corporate business tax, and then they're on a higher income earner tax. And in the years of COVID and right after COVID, we saw things like capital gains and the stock market really increase, right? And so for those higher income earners who have a higher percentage of their income come from capital gains, there was a lot more revenue. And that meant that what was estimated to be, to be brought in by that tax actually was, there was a lot more money that was coming in than was anticipated. And, Metro, who is the administrator of the program, really, encouraged counties to get that money out. We wanted to get that money out there because we knew there was such a critical need. But we're in a different position now. I think we've returned a little bit more back to normal in terms of the revenues that are coming in, and it's just a decrease in those dollars from one year to the next. So in December, Metro updated the revenue forecast for all of the counties. We learned then that there was going to be a shortfall both for this fiscal year that we're currently in, as well as this one that my budget is about today for next year. And so, so now we're having to really, refit the programs that we had invested in and started to match what our expectations of revenues are going to be. I will tell you that again, there was some great work that we were able to fund with those extra dollars. Some things that we knew helped people who living on the street, helped grow our providers. But unfortunately, we just don't have that capacity because we don't have the revenue for that. And that's something that we're facing here at Multnomah County, but it's also something that is similar in Washington and Clackamas counties.
You asked Kotek for some of that money. Did she give anything, or is she going to?
So right now, the gap that we have, we're in conversations. The mayor, the governor, myself are in conversations about how we can fill this need. This is something that we're going to be working closely on. It is something that I would love to have the city council and the board support of our ask. I think it's going to be now that my budget is finalized, now that the mayor's budget is getting close to being finalized, we have a much more specific number and areas of focus based on what we were able to fund for that. So there'll be more information about that coming out in the next week or so.
So her money would basically go to expand, not to fill some of the holes that you mentioned?
Not necessarily. No, I didn't say that. We're gonna, so basically looking at what I was able to fund, I will say that even areas where I was able to fund, it wasn't to the level that we were funding them last year. So there are still gaps across the continuum that need to be filled. So what I want to make sure is that we have alignment between what the county is asking for with the city. So it's a shared ask that we have so that the legislature knows and hears very clearly, like, these are the most critical needs that we have and we need your help in funding them. And I think, we know that this is the highest priority for people in our community. It is the thing that we've been working so diligently on. And so I'm hopeful that the legislature will be supportive of our asks.
The gaps you just mentioned, though, where are those? Because it just says the employment program in homeless services that's cut. So what's going to be cut? I know there were 2 shelters on the chopping board. Are those going to end up being cut?
No, I preserved all of the shelter beds. So for me, my priorities for our homeless services department was making sure that anybody who is currently being housed because of rental assistance dollars or wraparound services or those kinds of things, they are not going to lose their housing. Making sure that we are not closing a single shelter bed, so my budget funds 2,913 beds. We do have some small expansion when we're talking about the family system, but we're not able to expand as much as we would have under a different budget situation. We're looking at some of those services and programs. You talked about employment assistance. I tried to preserve that as much as possible, but we weren't able to do that at 100%. So there's different areas I think where we could definitely, we know that there's a need, and we would love to have that state help, in the most populated city and county in the state.
So you're saying you will talk to the state and come up with some specific asks based on where the budget is right now?
Exactly, yeah. And I said, and that will be a shared ask between myself and the mayor and hopefully our councils and commissions as well.
So, but in the meantime, you had to take away from other departments in the county. Was there a general fund shortage too, or was it just the homeless services shortfall that's causing this hole?
No, there was a general fund shortfall of about $15 million. So in addition to having to fill that, and knowing that the shortfall was even greater, to a huge extent with the homeless services department, I made the decision in my budget to reallocate some of those general fund dollars from other departments into the homeless services department so we can, continue to uphold the homelessness continuum of care that we have.
Do you have any idea of why there was a shortfall in the general fund?
Yeah, I mean, so the driver of the change in our revenues for the general fund really is about our property taxes, our business income tax, some of these other ways that we get general fund dollars. The growth of those revenues are not keeping up with the growth of our expenses. And so we do have a small growth in our general fund, but that's not enough to keep pace with our expenses. And frankly, like, this is really the issues that we're talking about that are affecting our downtown Portland, about bringing keeping businesses here, about attracting businesses, about bringing people back downtown. The commercial real estate does have an impact on the property taxes. And so for me, I want Multnomah County to be seen as a partner and part of the solution as we're thinking about how we can make our city and our county thrive again, to use the mayor's expression, boom again, although I like a bloom cycle, but that is a really key thing, because those dollars, and having the businesses there and the dollars that both are generated by people living and working in Multnomah County, but also having the businesses and the commercial buildings here, are key to not just the county, but the city, school districts, et cetera. So that is something that is a priority of mine, and I know the boards as we think about the future of the county and the city.
On that note about the businesses here, people living and working, what's your message to people that are concerned that it can't get better because they see problems, but there isn't the money to fix those problems? And then you say the money comes from people being here, but people that aren't here. What's the message to people that are worried that it won't be able to get better?
Yeah, I absolutely know that things are going to get better, because they already are. We've seen in recent polling that people are understanding, like, things are getting better, things are looking better. We're seeing crime rates drop across the county. So there is a marked change that is happening. I think what people should feel confidence in is that those resources that we do have, we are focused on using the data that we've been investing in, the work that we've done in analyzing programs and what's effective. We are going to be smarter than ever about the dollars that we have, and we are working in partnership with the city of Portland, the East County cities, the county, metro, the other, the state. Like, we're working together to address and solve those problems, and that's something that we are continuing to double down on. For me, the work that the county does is connected, whether we're talking about the crisis intervention we do around homelessness or folks who are in our custody and jail, to the prevention work that we do. And that's why across the board, for me, it was about preserving those direct services and investing in those things that we know are going to have long-term positive impact on our city and our county.
Can you talk about crime getting better and the commitment to public safety? So can you talk about the decision to reduce the district attorney's office budget?
Yeah, so there was the only budget that didn't have any cuts in it was the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office budget, as well, and our corrections health, right? Those were the ones that were held harmless. Everyone else, including other public safety, like our Department of Community Justice that does parole and probation, had a 3% cut. So that was what the reduction that I asked the district attorney's office to put forward, and I took those cuts to about 2% of the budget from where they were. But again, before that work even started of taking reductions, there were about 10 or 11 positions, about $2 million worth of one-time only dollars that were rolled into the district attorney's ongoing budget. So we made sure that instead of having to fight for those positions, that was something that was just going to be guaranteed in his budget, not just for this year, but for all the years going forward. It is a hard budget decision. I mean, across the board, it's a hard budget year. We have had to make cuts. We have had to reduce programs, eliminate programs all throughout the county services. And like I said, everybody across the county had to do that, including the district attorney's office.
And what are those reductions likely not going to be taken without pushback from the DA's office? So you talk about this isn't final until June 12th. When people talk about complaints that they have or things that they want to see, how much can they expect things to actually change in this budget before that June 12th deadline? Can they expect to bring these concerns and actually see something change, or is this just formality?
No, this is absolutely when the most important public part of the budget process starts, right? We did a lot of work in creating my budget to engage with the public. We had over 4,000 people respond to our survey. We had a town hall. But now we're going to have a chance to hear from the public on a regular basis. We have 3 public budget hearings scheduled for May that I encourage people to attend. It's where we're going to be hearing directly from the public in our board meetings. We're going to be hearing from the departments, and it's when the entire board, so myself and the other 4 commissioners, are really going to have a chance to dig in, ask questions, and make sure that their priorities are. So we're going to have a conversation. This is when we can have amendments to the budget that I've proposed. There's always changes that happen between when the chair's budget's released and when it gets adopted in June 12th, and I have I don't have any doubts that will be the same here.
We've already heard that the district attorney not pleased with this budget. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that there's probably a lot of folks and departments that are not pleased just because we haven't been able to fund, some of these critical services like we did. There were cuts that we had to take to programs that are really important to people across the board. There were cuts to programs that have an impact in areas of service that we know are important, whether it is health-related programs or human services-related programs. This is the reality when we have a budget, when we have budget deficits. That's why focusing on our long-term economic growth is going to be such an important thing. But I can understand, being disappointed. But it's a time when all of us have to, tighten our belts and really look at and prioritize on what matters most. Thanks.
Have you had one more, right? Have you had a conversation with Nathan Vasquez, and how do you feel about what he has to say about this? Was his department reduced any more than some of the other departments you reduced?
Oh, no, I mean, in fact, so yes, I have had a conversation with the district attorney just yesterday. We had a one-on-one meeting. And so, and he talked about some of the, some of the concerns he had about the cuts that he was going to be experiencing in his budget. But his budget and his department was actually reduced at a much smaller level than many other departments, including our health department, including human services, including our homeless services department. So again, trying to minimize the cuts on some of our critical things like public safety, but recognizing that in this budget environment, these kind of cuts have to impact everyone. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.